Hey doing guys, I thought we'd jump in for this video and go through my sort of 1 to 17 analysis on all the teams here heading into 2024. So the brackets, I think they'll end up on the ladder and how that may affect obviously you watching the game, but also your fantasy and SuperCoach picks heading into this season. So when you're looking at this league, the biggest thing I want to talk about, guys, is it is seriously closer than ever. Last year we saw a very large amount of teams that seem to be really close in where they're at in terms of ladder positions, where they could end up, where they ended up, and I think it's actually closer again this year with the majority of teams improving coming into this season. So I would expect less sort of 40 to 10 scores and a lot more sort of 24-20s, meaning I think it's going to be harder to target certain stretches of games as chances of winning streaks for these certain teams, due to most of the teams improving and sort of a very limited amount of teams regressing in here, which we'll get into that when we get into that sort of bottom teams. But to kick things off, guys, my top 4 locks, I think there's 3 teams here that will definitely be in the top 4, barring a ridiculous amount of injuries or something like that. Again, this is my opinion, guys. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Or if you wanted to DM me about it, that's cool too. So these teams here, these 3 squads, you can, and that's the Panthers, the Broncos, and the Storm. These are teams you can bank on being solid enough that they won't have any, and if they do, it might be one sort of blowout loss, and it's probably going to be around the origin time. And they're going to win more games or sort of be in close games at worst, therefore making the top 4 and being really solid teams to focus on for your fantasy and SuperCoach teams, and they'll have good options in there, usually as sort of guns, and it's going to be a few less value, and especially on the cheapy side, some value options because a few teams have lost some players, which we'll speak about in a sec, but expect them to not have sort of big peaks and troughs and be as volatile as some of these other teams here. They're likely to be super consistent, especially those guns. So the Panthers, they are the best team in the comp. There's nothing more to say on that. 3 wins in a row and a grand final loss there. So really expect more of the same from this team, with Taylor May replacing Stephen Crichton there. They obviously lose a little bit on him given he's such a game breaker, but Taylor May is awesome at that. Spencer Leniu is obviously a loss as well, but they always have someone to cover. You saw Lindsey Smith come in and do a good job last year. This year, you're going to see guys like Liam Henry, Maverick Guy, these types of guys come on and cover that 17 spot and that 33 minutes that Leniu you lose from him. They'll be able to cover that for sure. So really on the fantasy and SuperCoach side, you're paying for what you get in this group. Be confident with your gun picks, and you do need injuries to find some value. With the Panthers there, again, not too much else to say. I think they'll come in first position or second position very clearly there. They won't miss this top 4. And the last year for Jerome Luai, I think they'll go out in a bang again. You look at this team, and so many guys have been moved on, or they couldn't keep them in their salary cap over the last bunch of years, and they continue to win year after year. So a special team, and one you want to focus on with a lot of those guns, with Cleary likely being your in your team or captain in fantasy and SuperCoach there. Guys, obviously see the private group footer down below. Jump in the description, check out those details there, and obviously it's all in the Discord in the announcement section as well. Make sure you're listening on podcasts as well if you prefer to listen to me that way in the car or whatever. And big thank you for watching all these videos. Broncos, so here they have 3 top 10 player losses, right, in their squad. You have some fringe guys that are in that starting 13, and these guys were not in Flegler. In Farnworth, obviously being a couple of big ones there, and then Capewell coming towards the back end of his career has been super integral for this team over the years for sure. But they don't really have any big gains apart from their youngsters coming through, right? So you lose Capewell's experience on the left, replaced by some young talent. It could go one of 2 ways for sure. And speaking to a couple of Broncos fans, in particular Matty Keyworth from the private group, massive Broncos fan, says he watches most of the games multiple times. So you can definitely take some of his advice on how you think things are going to go as well. And I'm going to do that here, so thanks, mate. But Broncos fans, including him, saying that sort of Capewell was a little bit lackluster last season in attack. We definitely saw that. Like he kind of fell off a little bit. Could say it was just a bad year, but age comes into that factor as well. And he started having defensive issues as well. So with Piakura coming in, definitely has a little bit more on the attacking side these days, and will have to sort out his defense as he comes into the league. But that can definitely happen. And you could probably see that as a net win, obviously, probably a little bit later into the season when it gets important for the Broncos. So overall, that's fine. Flegler's hard to replace, but he does come with his own issues as well, with the sin bins and the errors, etc. So yeah, Matty wasn't too worried about losing Flegs, and he seemed to like Hetherington a little bit more. It seems to get the attack a little bit straighter. And yeah, it doesn't come with all these, the sin bins, the errors, the penalties, and the like there. So Haas and Carrigan are going to have to share the load unless the young prop steps in, which they have a couple of them, Willison, Takura there, a couple of guys that could come in and play more of a Flegler type role, but obviously not as good as him at this point. Or they use Baker, they use Farnworth, and we'll see how those guys go for sure. Farnworth there definitely leaves a hole at the center position. They hope to replace that with Cobbo, and with his ball running. You can see both of them being very similar as ball runners, but both of them obviously have their defensive issues. Cobbo out in the right wing. Can he defend better at center? Who knows at this point, and we'll see how that plays out. Can he transition well defensively, or is it going to take some time? And they're obviously going to have to replace that wing spot, which does leave a little bit of a hole. But you have Dean Mariner, you have Arthurs or Oates there that could do a decent job there for sure, with Mariner having the most upside. Corey Oates coming off a bit of a tough year. Did get put into the Queensland squad though, so obviously Billy Slater sees something in him for sure. And then you get another year on for Mam and Walsh. It's definitely a great thing. Expect the same or a small drop of wins, but still likely second or third, potentially first in the ladder as well. I do not see them moving out of the top three, in my opinion. So those three players need to be replaced with sort of cheap players in fantasy, providing some options. Obviously with Piakura, with the Bakers, Hetheringtons, these kind of guys. Maybe an outside back. Plus the top guns are going to be good. As always, this is a team you can rely on very clearly for fantasy and Supercoach. Moving on to Storm to finish things off. I see Storm improving this season. Even if it isn't on the win columns as much, I think they'll play better, which means their scores during games are more likely to be a few more blowouts on their positive side than a few of the closer games where they were scrapping for wins, that's for sure. So I think it's only upside with Blore providing attacking weapon at that on the left. Running off Munster, I think, is going to be massive if that's the way they go. They will at some point for sure. Even if it isn't to start the year. There's talk of Liero moving to the middle, and Josh King potentially could go back to sort of a prop role, and that provides a really good rotation there if King's there. Liero is in that middle. He seems to defend better in the middle anyway. He likes to sort of go in the middle sometimes and defend. So we'll see how he goes with ball in hand though. Pat back. Munster at full health. He wasn't last year, so I think all of the spine members are likely to improve and link up again better this year. Jerome Hughes has talked about his quality hasn't been there the last year, especially. So expect him all to bounce back, a bit like 2021 and 2022, where they were a much better side. Grant now is the sole captain as well. It's pretty cool for him. Just means that he's on the field for longer than what Welch was, so I think that's going to be helpful. They had Grant as part of the extended leadership group, which was 4 or 5 guys, and even he was saying that it was hard for the ref to know who to talk to sometimes to get, if Welsh was off, who's the stand-in captain. So I think this helps, and it's clearly I think it clearly shows that he's going to be on the field very close to 80 minutes most games, and obviously if he needs a small rest, or if they've won big, then he'll come off for sure, like he always does. So for fantasy and Supercoach, the options come from both edges and the spine members, in my opinion, and I think they'll deliver. So a very, very solid side. Obviously, the buy in round 4 is what it is, but it's late enough compared to that of Titans and Dolphins that you can worry a little bit less and kind of work it out, but will be hard to have sort of Pat, Grant, Sean Bloor if you're going for all 3 of those in that round 4 buy, that's for sure. So 2 might be the number. 3 of them could be tough. All right, let's move to the top contenders here for spots 4 to 6. And if you haven't joined the community league, guys, that's also in the description with the Discord link. So there's not a lot in the community league yet. I haven't spoken about it too much, but now's the time to jump in there. Whoever wins that, guys, gets a free spot in the private group next year, which is cool. All right, so these are top contenders for spots 4 to 6 likely. This is where they're fighting for, where I think that they could be, and a few of these are going to miss out because there's 5 in this list. The rosters alone says that these teams will be in with a shot for these top spots in the ladder. That's for sure. The teams in this section after this are going to be the swing teams below these 5, so they could easily push up into this category with the rubber of the green as well. So this 4 all the way through to like 12 standpoint is super tough, and it could work out to be any of these teams go anywhere between those spots. A few of these teams rely on one player heavily in the Sharks, the Warriors and the Knights, with Nico, with SJ and Ponga. But if they stay fit, are most likely to win more games and lose and stay super consistent, which is helpful for your fantasy and SuperCoach squads as well. You can pop players from these teams into your fantasy teams with some peace of mind, really, knowing that they will perform fairly well the majority of the time and could go on winning streaks, which is great for all of those involved. Obviously, they're the teams that, as you saw with Knights, like most of their guys became super relevant in fantasy and SuperCoach. And which was very helpful. And you see, even at the end of the season when Roosters went on a run, all their players were performing super well. And same with the Rabbitohs at the beginning of the season. So can they build some consistency? Let's start with the Roosters there. Very slow starters the past few years, so be wary on that. They could definitely miss these top spots again if they are slow to get out of the blocks. But at this stage, the team has no injury worries coming into this year. They're extra stacked, so they can't finish worse than last year, in my opinion, sneaking into the 8. Angus is back good. Brandon Smith, you got Watson as well. They add in Lenu, Wong, his emergence, and Dom Young. It is borderline unfair at this point. Their forward pack, their outside backs is absolutely stacked. Obviously, in the halves, there's a small worry if there's an injury to a Walker. No Hutchison to drop in this time. They've got Sanders Smith who could do a job, but that's only one sort of injury cover for their halves. There are options for round 1 for sure in fantasy and SuperCoach, but there could just be too many mouths to feed. Roosters need to perform well for most of the options to go well also, so I definitely think you should tread carefully in round 1, given they have a fairly tough draw to kick things off. But across the season, they should be a very good side. The Rabbitohs, they were first to round 13 last year and missed the 8. So, wild. They could be one of the better teams in the comp, but as I said, very much a swing type of side. There's some positives coming into this year, though, and you'll see that with the majority of these teams. But White joins, which is great. He has that connection with Latrell, so I think that's going to be helpful for both of them. It really shores up that left-hand side and creates an absolute juggernaut. The team's fit. Really, what could go wrong with the Bunnies? That's how I see. Are the off-field dramas sorted out? Maybe. Let's hope so. They need to find consistency, and then they can compete with the top teams. We know they can, and they should be in this bracket at minimum, just like the Roosters. They both have stacked teams. Can Latrell stay on the park, and will their forwards stay fit? Because we know last year they had a fair few issues in the forward pack, and that definitely hurt them at times as well. I think there's value to be found in the forwards here and in the outside backs if the Bunnies start well enough, and I definitely think that they can. They have a fairly tough draw to kick things off as well, as a lot of these top sort of 8 type of teams are playing each other in that first section. And it's just going to depend on who comes out hot. There are going to be teams that lose, and there are going to be good teams that are sitting in the bottom 8 to begin the season. How do they go against each other? All right, the Sharkies there. Really, just to me, they felt clunky all last season, and this is the 3rd year they have together now. Do they have enough in the forward pack, like enough grunt? Which they should do. They've got Braden Hamlin-Uele, they've got Royce Hunt, like Toby Rudolph is a strong player. You have Finucane and McInnes. You think that's enough in the middle, but they just don't seem to have that amazing go forward. They do seem to use their outside backs and through Hines, obviously to get them down the park and make plenty of meters between those guys. So can they be better? Will the left-hand side be better? Surely they can't get any worse than where they were. Does Trindle complement Hines? There are a lot of questions with the Sharks, and that's why I see them being a swing type of team, anywhere between sneaking into the top 4 all the way down to sort of 8th or 9th, something like that. They're currently an injury-free team, which is great. Is this the year that they pop? Yeah, that's the big question mark there. I don't see them missing the 8 in any world other than if Hines gets a long-term injury. So for them in fantasy and SuperCoach, Hines, McInnes, Ramian, Nikora are the main good options to kick things off, and really throughout the season there shouldn't be too many other in there. Yeah, you can pop Trindle in there as well, which would be cool as well for Trindle, not Rindle. So really no issues for them coming into this season, which is awesome, and only real upside you'd imagine. Warriors, they add RTS and they add Capewell to a top 4 team, so really they can't get worse from here, you'd imagine. They've got Chanel Harris-Tavita to bump up their half stocks as well, which is cool. But last year, did the stars align? That's the big question mark. They snuck into it, they got into a top 4 position, did really well. They could rest guys in the last week. That was awesome. Can they replicate that? I do see a small drop off, but really not enough to fall too far. They could be like a 5th, 6th team, in my opinion, very comfortably if these other teams I think that they have more of a stacked roster than what the Warriors do. And if they can all perform, they can go above them. But if not, then the Warriors should still sneak into that 4th, 5th spot there and be great. Teams will look to mark that right side a bit better for sure. But can they stop Egan, Tohu, and AFB through the middle? Absolutely wreaking havoc. And then Johnson doing his, and Metcalf and these guys doing their thing on the back of that. With with CNK out the back flying. So that's the big question mark with here. It's very unlikely to be able to defend both really, really well. So that's where teams' issue were last year, trying to defend them. They were absolutely incredible. The fantasy and Supercoach options are slim on the back of a career year, I think, for the Warriors. All right, the last one in this list is the Knights, and they did have a very clear dream run to end the year. They had a massive win streak, and if you average that out, so the end run with the slower start before Ponga at fullback, and I see a similar amount of wins for them. Probably don't have a massive streak, lose a few in there, but then gain a few wins at the start. Very, very close to to being in that sort of 6, 7, 8 role in the ladder for sure. They lose Dom Young, they lose Fitzy, they add Cogger, they add Pierce Paul, Will Price, Jenkins, and they have a healthy Adam Elliott, which is absolutely massive for them. Obviously, if you lose Ponga, that can be very, very hurtful, but that's a lot of gains, and that increases their depth as well, which is awesome. I expect a great team again, but they're probably more likely to be closer to 8th than 4th, in my opinion, just with I have the other guys in Roosters, Rabbitohs. If they can play well, they can bump up ahead of them for sure. Absolutely have amazing depth, as I said, and that's going to help them win tight games when these injuries strike, that's for sure. So, team that's going to be super fun to watch again. It's very hard to see much fantasy and Supercoach value in this side, given the run that they had, except for sort of Adam Elliott / whoever gets the edge spot, the left edge, and then the wing spot, which are going to be the 3 to start. All the other guys are getting at peak price, Pongas and the like, but they could be great just to have to get points for sure throughout the season. Okay, teams that are fighting for spot 6 to 12, in my opinion. So these are the big swing 4 teams. They can finish anywhere between 4th and 12th, and depending on which team turns up in round 1 during the year, for sure. They could hold some fantasy and Supercoach gold, given there are some underpriced guys due to the last season where they had the up and the down runs, but more down than up. Obviously, with the Cowboys, you can see there it's Cowboys, Eels, Manly, and also the Dolphins. I've got in there as well. They all had bad runs, and they also had sort of stretches of games where they did really well. So, on the contrary, some players from these teams could hurt you if you're looking for attacking upside and the team struggles. We saw that with the Cows at the beginning of last year. Obviously, the Dolphins started well, fell away, and Manly can be very up and down as well. They finished really well for a few of their players. So with the Eels there, you had lots of forward injuries and dramas last year that derailed the Eels season. After making the grand final the season before, they could easily bounce back and be a top team. But it is hard to see them sort of miss the 8 if the team stays together. So they missed it last year. How do they push their way into this 8? If everything stays together, I think they can do it. Moses really improved last season. I'm expecting another big one from him. Brown, when he's actually on the park, looking as good as ever as well. There's definitely room for growth from the Eels outside backs and a lane bounce back in fantasy and Supercoach. So there's plenty on the radar. Let's just see how they look in trials and sort of where their team's named in round 1, because guys like Simonson, guys like Penasini, Sivo, all options in fantasy along with Lane, Moses and Brown. Obviously, Hopgood's going to be great. There's so many options in this team. Just see how they're looking and how that team list ends up. For the Cowboys, my Cowboys, hey? So watch for them. Every year it's the exact same. Watch how they defend in the first few weeks. If it's great, they can finish 4th or 5th. If it's bad, they just miss the 8. It is what it is. They had a stretch of sort of 5 or 6 games last year where they looked incredible and they looked like one of the best teams in the comp. And I was saying that they're probably 2nd or 3rd following Panthers and the Broncos. They'll look better than everyone else, but they could only do it for the 5 or 6 weeks. Every game outside of that, their defense was absolutely putrid. So they need a Tamalolo bounce back and Cotter to be unleashed, because their middles is where they like a little bit. The edges are great. Outside backs are pretty solid. Semi Valame came and had a great one. They've got Zach Laybutt to come in and he's pushing for a spot as well. Kyle Feld, is he going to get his spot? So there's plenty of competition in the outside backs. Dearden needs a bigger season for sure. Jeremiah Nanai needs a bigger season as well. He needs a bit of a bounce back from everyone, I think, for sure. So if the defense is on with the Cows for fantasy and Supercoach, the team missed a lot of tackles, so their missed tackles will be down, which will be helpful, and there'll be less chance of getting blown out. which is great for all involved. The Robson, Strinky, Dearden, Holmes, whoever the new centre is. It's going to be helpful for all those guys for sure. Manly, obviously a lot hinges on Tommy, clearly. But bringing over Luke Brooks is a big win for the club as a second halves weapon, and obviously for the origin period when DCE's away, the Trbojevic boys and the like. Kohler's emergence as an attacking weapon and Hamoli's growth as well should keep them more consistent on top of the good wins, which would be great. So they'll get more good wins when all of them are fit. And middle forwards are definitely the worry again. Can Sipley and Paseka have a massive year along with recruits in Corey Waddell? And they're really going to need to get something out of Josh Schuster as well, which would be very, very helpful. So from round one, there's sort of limited fantasy and Supercoach options at this stage, apart from the left edge and Tommy Turbo. I think we just watch how they're playing. Let's go to Dolphins to finish off this list, guys. The key signings, moved the Dolphins up to be more likely in this group than they are likely to be in the bottom group, but they could definitely swing up or down. They had a lot of key injuries in the spine last season, and they simply didn't have enough squad depth to cover it. Now they do. Plus, they're adding outside backstrike and grunt up front. So this is a team fighting for the 8, in my opinion. Expect more consistency from the Dolphins and not playing the season in 2 halves like they did last season, doing really well at the beginning and then really poorly from the middle onwards. And they obviously having those injuries to the 2 guys in the spine there was very hurtful for him. For fantasy and Supercoach, limited options at Dolphins with their round 3 bye. It's easy to watch them and sort of see what happens in that first few weeks and then jump on players from there. But I imagine 1 or 2 guys will be targets in round 1. Hammer, Bostock, JMK could all definitely be improvers in this side. All right, guys, let's finish this off. Again, thank you for watching all the way through. You are legends. So likely in a spot sort of 13 to 17 on the ladder here. The teams here that are more likely, the teams where a lot of these fantasy spots are open for round 1 and throughout the season, just because they've usually lost a few players, guys haven't scored as well, and there's potential for bounce back or roles can come up usually as well. Some positions will perform better than others, and we can get sucked into players from these teams because they have a certain role, but maybe the attacking stats aren't going to be there, which could be tough. So very much the swing fantasy and Supercoach players could be really poor for you, could be really good. Players who rely on attacking these teams can be burnt for sure. You can be burnt by. They're also the highest chance of big volatile swings if they play well one week and bad the next. So they could get hammered by some of the best sides and it skews your players' scores dramatically and sort of hurts your week. So something to note with a few of those teams. With the Dragons, so in recent time, you could always expect a lot of points in Dragons games. If you look at their games last season, there was very rarely an under sort of 30, 36 type of points in a game. So to win more games, they need to turn into more of a Raiders-style defense, I think. They have a decent amount of attack in them, but they just can't defend well enough. That's why those games end up a bit more free-flowing. The new coach is definitely going to change things for sure, but they just don't have the roster that the other teams do, in my opinion, to compete at the highest level. An improving forward pack this season will have to step up, so they've got a lot of options now. How good are they is the big question. You got Harmsele, Couchmans, Eisenhuth, RFM, all coming in, all could do a decent job for sure. They're all going to help, but they don't have sort of a great game breaker in any position other than Zach Lomax, who sounds like he might play some wing, hopefully some fullback, and then Ben Hunt, obviously, there as well. For Fantasy and Supercoach, there's one edge spot open, and maybe a center as well, but we'll see how that goes in like a Sully or something like that. So yeah, see how they look in trials as a squad for sure. Tigers up next. So it's been a really, really good off season for the Tigers. Obviously with their board stepping down, getting booted, Shane Richardson coming in, Benji the coach now. He seems to be setting good standards in the club, which is awesome. So I think you can only expect improvement, but sort of how much from the Tigers, and that's why I've still got them in this group. The buy in round 1 probably helps them get settled a little bit more. Growth from Buller will be the key. Plus the performance of the forward pack and the new halves pairing. They have enough forwards. Can they do really well? It's going to take some time to gel. You had Bateman coming in late last year. Some injuries and the like. So I think he's going to be fit and it's going to be very helpful for them. Justin Olam helps them with the outside back sort of grit and experience, which is awesome. So there's maybe a few points and a few sort of less demolition jobs, which would be helpful. From a fantasy and Supercoach side, them having a buy in round 1 kind of just lets you leave them and then we can work out what's happening over the first few weeks. If we hear anything about their starting side, you could use one of them as a looper, but outside of that, probably worth just leaving them to kick things off for the season. All right, the last 3 teams, you've got the Titans. I've still got them down here. I just don't see them going ahead of the other teams above. Seems like they improve slightly each season. Campbell at 1 and Fermor returning to improve an edge is super helpful for them. Expect them to start fairly well with the slightly softer draw than most clubs and be in the top 8 across the first 6 weeks. So they should be able to win sort of 3 out of the first 6, including a bye, and be around that top 8. But from there, obviously the draw gets a bit harder, and I just think the other teams are better. Only thing to note there, Campbell hasn't been training with the main group all preseason, which is hurtful. But Keanu Keeney is more than serviceable as a backup. And yeah, they're well covered in most positions, which is awesome if injuries come. Tanner Boyd, I think, needs to take the next step, and Verrills needs to stay on the park for them to do well. So look at most sort of Titan players from round 3, given they have a round 2 bye. Bo Fermor, Fafita Boys, Dave, Jojo, Jaden Campbell, all really good guys to look at. And the last 2 guys, so the Dogs there, they really have to improve there. The introduction of Stephen Crichton, Sexton or Hutcho, obviously that gives them a little bit of depth as well in the halves. Connor Tracy, a healthy Kiraz, Kickout, and Max King, really important 3 players for them as well to add on to the other guys. The forward pack is the worry, obviously. They do need a big season from guys like Liam Knight, from Sam Hughes and co. Whoever steps in and plays that role to help Marnie in the middle for sure, because he was on an island last year. Copping it, that's for sure. They shouldn't make the 8, I don't think, but we'll get smashed less often. So I do see a very even league this season overall, as I said at the start. Options for fantasy and SuperCoach will pop up this season in all positions for sure, with roles and opportunities and team improvement. I've got it for sure. Expect Burton to improve also. He was fairly lackluster, not great last season. All right, the Raiders, to finish things off there. To be honest, on paper, it looks like the Raiders are the only team in this league that has regressed, losing a strike weapon in attack when they were a fairly limited attacking side already. They will be a good defensive team again, provided that the fullback and the 5'8 players, center, whoever's the newer youngsters are, can defend well and talk well in defense, or they get good help from their experienced guys. They have gains in Zach Hosking, Morgan Smithies. They obviously have Chris out and Horsburgh out to start, but they'll be back and they'll really bolster this side after a few weeks. 1 for Chris, round 3 for Horsburgh. So those gains, they make their forward pack even better, which was already great. How will they defend on the edges? Basically, the Raiders is the question, and where do the points come from? An injury to Fogarty, and they're in big trouble, I think, just for the direction. They really need him this year. From a fantasy SuperCoach side, options galore, obviously, but can they perform well enough to make decent money? Obviously, is there lots of missed tackles in their game? Do they have any attack in there, or are they just going to be plotter defensive guys, or sort of, if it's fullback, it's 120 meters, 150 meters with not much attack, some errors in their game? That's the big question mark there. So I'm not going to do a 1 to 17 ladder here. You've got the brackets there. It's way too hard to even slot any of them. Like you could say, Eels could come 12th, or you could have them at 5th. You could do that with a lot of these sides as well. In Cowboys, they could definitely be a top 5 side. They could be 10th as well. So I'm not going to do that. I just think it's a bit of a waste of time. So this is where we're at. These are all the spots that are available for sides, and where I think that they'll end up. Expect a very close season, which means that, fantasy and SuperCoach guys, just make sure you're getting the right player. They're very unlikely to have a clear run where they can dominate. So just pick the right player with good stats, and you should be fine coming into the season. You won't sort of be annoyed or disappointed with picking a club that's going to have a bit of a run. Just like the Roosters to start last season, and Cowboys, we picked them to have a run. They come up against some slightly lesser sides on paper, but they came out and beat them and smashed them. So that's that, guys. I hope you enjoyed that video, and it was very helpful for, if you just like my opinion on footy, but obviously the fantasy and SuperCoach ramifications of where teams are likely to sit on the ladder. Thanks for that, guys, and we'll catch you in the next one.